Good evening. We're going to begin soon. We'll just wait for the last people coming in. So, good evening. Thank you for attending this meeting on the dead, those who have gone missing, and their identification. My name is Sarah Chateau, and I'm going to be moderating this session with panelists that I'll be presenting very soon. First, I wanted to thank the Crash and Cell 2 for the organization of this public meeting. This is a workshop on migration that took place the whole day today and that will continue tomorrow. We've been working on this at MSF. We're working on migration in general. So thank you for this public conference. Thank you for the technicians and thanks to the interpreters. We're going to try to speak as clearly as possible in French and in English. You can ask your questions in any of these two languages, and we'll try to stick to the time. I'll just take a few minutes to introduce the topic of this conference and why this question, why the choice of this topic, which is not discussed on a daily basis in our operations, but this has come back regularly via our teams. And we're going to see it with our panelists. We've seen various aspects. The Mediterranean, as we've said in the media, has become a cemetery for migrants. More than 26,000 people have died since 2014 in their attempts to cross the Mediterranean between North Africa and Europe. There are also many people who die at the borders in the Balkans, in Calais, in the Channel, and other places. And there's a migratory crisis, which is in South America, in Central America. We don't speak that much about it, with many people dying there too and missing. All these people trying to go to the United States, and they're going through the Darien Pass, which is very complex. The Darien is a zone of marshes and forests. It's at the borderline between Colombia and Panama, 160 kilometers in length. It's an area without any infrastructure. It is the missing link on the road between Central America, North America, and South America. And that's another migratory topic that we'll be discussing. A lot of bodies have gone missing, and among those who are found, many are not identified. At MSF, in our operations, our teams have often wondered during the past few years. We've worked on migrations, and one of the questions put by the heads of mission in Libya, where at the time they would distribute bags in hospitals, there was the whole question about those people dying in the desert, and this is often neglected. And we wanted to have a visibility on the number of deaths on the migratory routes within Africa. And by discussing with the migrants themselves, many hadn't warned their families when they left. And so the families didn't know about their destination, what they wanted to do, or their decision, which route they would choose. They had no news about their colleagues, their friends, the people they've met. So give a name to the dead and help the living to try to identify these people. And we had trouble helping the living. So I'm talking about the discussions that we began at MSF in 2017, 2018 on this very specific point. There are very few players talking about this at the ICRC. These people were beginning discussing this topic. So there was a human value, a humanitarian value to provide the service. And at MSF, we mainly worked on the research on migrants and not on the dead and the missing. And today it's the opportunity to talk about this increase in the people dying anonymously. And now we are mobilizing ourselves so that these bodies might be identified and treated with dignity. And I think they'll go back on this, the dignity for these people. And it's also a question of helping the families close to those who've gone missing so they can start grieving and start all the administrative paperwork to obtain the death certificate, etc. So this evening we have 4 panelists. We have 3 panelists who are there remotely. They're online, but they're going to be here. I'm going to introduce them very quickly, and we'll present them again when it'll be their turn to speak. We have Jose-Pablo Baraybar, who is anthropologist, archaeologist. He's of Peruvian origin, and he's worked a lot in his country on the Srebrenica death, and he's worked at the ICRC on the dead and the missing, first in the Mediterranean and now in the Central American countries. So we'll be able to talk about this other migratory crisis. We have Silvia Di Meo, who's an anthropologist, a researcher at the University of Genoa. She's the president of the Memory Mediterranean. And they are in charge of searching for the missing people in Tunisia. And she will talk about all the psychosocial points. And we have Mr. Filippo Furri, who's an anthropologist, and he started working on the dead with Migro Europe and with the Boat for People coalition. With them, he has prepared a guide to support the families, and he'll talk about his work and his research. And Rachid, who is an artist, an Algerian artist, painter, and engraver, and he has created the Zarzes Garden in Tunisia. It's a cemetery. So I will let you talk. I just wanted to introduce you all. Now we're going to talk about the dead. What are the issues? We are not treating this topic. And is this the symptom of some other questions in this migratory crisis? Our first speaker, Filippo, will talk about the issues at stake. I'm going to give him the floor very quickly before presenting the initiatives of Silvia, Jose, and Rachid. So, Filippo, I do not know if you can hear us. Are you connected? Yes, I can hear you. I'm here. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you the floor, therefore. Thank you. Thank you, says Filippo. Sorry, I could not follow the whole day, but I'm traveling right now. And I'll go straight into the nitty-gritty, and I'm not going to talk about the details of the European policies. We've been working on that with Migratory, and they're part of the associations like GISTI, CEMAD in France, FTBS in Tunisia. So we can believe that the hardening of these policies on migration control have had an impact on the increase of deaths at sea. In central Italy, it's one of the places where we have an increasing number of deaths. You mentioned the figures. All the figures are by default, like the Canary route, Busara. The migratory routes are all routes of death. And what I'd like to introduce here, and you mentioned it, we as an association, as researcher, I'm a researcher in an association also, and we've begun working to support the families. And there are associations that support families. So my activity began in 2011 with the Arab Spring, when we had Tunisians disappearing between Tunisia and Italy. And there was a coalition which was called Boatful People. And in 2015, after the wreck, we set up a project to inform the families on the missing people. And we tried to explain the approach that the families would have to follow to find their near and dear, to identify them in case their corpse would be recovered. And this action led me to work as a consultant for the ICRC, especially for a project that came out 2 years ago. I think Jose will talk about this. And this is a work I carried out with a researcher, a colleague, on the management of the bodies coming to the city of Catania. Between 2014 and 2018, the city of Catania received 270 bodies of people disembarked by NGOs and Coast Guard boats. So how did we manage these bodies locally right up to the burial? So these three activities it allowed us, actually, all the people with whom I worked also, to understand the failures, the structural issues related to this problem, the management of the bodies of the people dying while migrating. And there's the difficulty because you can't sometimes recover the bodies during accidents. Then you have the disembarkation and the very quick and fast way. The forensics, they go very fast too in Catania. If we want to keep the biological phenotypes of the people, the biological characteristics of the bodies, we use the term negroid each and every time, whether the person is from Afghanistan, from the sub-Saharan area, or the Maghreb, it's still negroid. And the forensics, the terms they use, the way they do things is very quick and fast. And what is important is that the investigators don't have to identify the victims. It is not compulsory. They do it only if it is useful for their investigation. And often the bodies are buried under X and there's no notification. Then there's the management of the cemeteries. And here I'm talking about the work I carried out in Italy. They're buried very quickly. In Tunisia, in the city of Sfax also, we've had that. And the difficulty to trace the sepulchres, which make our research activity, the work for the families, very complicated. So the structural failures for the management of the bodies, this has a terrible impact on the families who are searching for their near and dear, because if you are far away and you cannot have access, you have the language issues, you have all kinds of practical issues in the interaction with the authorities. And the operations are very complicated. If you're far away, you can't get a visa to go and collect the body of the person. It's very complicated. The ICRC is trying to help the families to identify the bodies, but it's very complex because the authorities don't really collaborate. Alexis might talk about this. It's been 8 months now. We've been trying to help a Guinean family to identify, to correct the identification of a girl that they lost, who was buried under X or a wrong identity. And the family is trying to get the body back, but they can't do it. They have huge difficulties to face. I'd like to end this introduction that can be studied deeper by the other speakers. Here, this is a summary of the figures of the ICRC report. This concerns the period between 2014 and 2019. We're still updating. And what I'd like to underline is that in the face of this dynamism and the activities of the NGOs at sea and MSF too, they would intervene in case of a wreck. They would collect the bodies and disembark them on the Italian coast so as to launch identification activities, if possible. Well, here we're facing something. There has been a change related to the European policies and externalization of the control, delegating the control of migration to the Libyan players and Tunisian authorities, for example. And so we realized that there are fewer bodies that are arriving in Europe, and especially Italy. So there are fewer bodies arriving in Italy. And this argument allows the Italian authorities and the Italian politics to say that the control strategies are working. But now to give you a practical example so as to better understand the situation, 49, that's the number of people who have disappeared or died in the Mediterranean in January 2023, according to IUN. This was based on information collected by institutional players mainly. And as I was saying, the Italian authorities, the press, which is close to the Italian government in place today, they said that the Italian policy of deterrence and control is working because they have diminished the number of deaths. And they're referring to the figures, they're comparing with 2022, where there had been 120 deaths. And now they're saying we have reduced the number of deaths by half. But the problem, I mean, this is official data. So there's an official discourse that is trying to minimize the number of victims and trying to make them disappear twice, these people who are trying to migrate. Because if you go on to the next slide, I've collected 3 slides. This is a job carried out by activists, by people who are in touch with families who are announcing that some people are missing. And between Tunisia and Italy, we counted 416 people who might have gone missing at sea. Most of the time, these are ghost ships, ships that have disappeared. We have no trace, nothing. So therefore, we cannot prove this disappearing. And the only thing we have is the statements, the information coming from families, people who've left. We know that they've left, but we know nothing more. And we've lost their trace in a period of time between the city of Sfax, especially, and the Italian coast. So you can show us the 3 slides. These are examples of cases. You have series of cases. And case after case, until January, we have more than 400 people, 416, if I'm not mistaken. And this brings us back to Tunisia. The bodies that do not reach Italy because they are not recovered, they are either recovered by the Tunisian authorities or worse, they are left at sea because recovering bodies is not a priority very often, too often. It's not mandatory. And I would like to tell you what the Home Minister in Tunisia said. He declared that between January and July 2023, the Tunisian authorities recovered 900 bodies. And there's a screenshot of the declaration of the minister, 900 bodies. So we must remember that in the research done by the ICRC between 2014 and 2018, over 5 years, we had 960 bodies recovered. Here we've recovered 900 bodies only in this period between January and July 2023. So you can imagine the number of people who have disappeared, who've gone missing. So the problem, the management of the bodies, the research carried out by the families, this is a whole series of problems. And if we analyze the forensics, we'll go back on this, but there are some obvious facts. The system is not standardized. There isn't enough technology, and there are fewer bodies recovered and more bodies disappearing at sea. And we can't even set up activities, improve the forensic activity because we don't even have the body. So the question for me is to strengthen and force the authorities to collect the bodies as much as possible. And this action is fundamental for the people deceased and the families, because the families, I mean, some bodies can be identified, but when the person disappears, the grieving, the mourning is very complicated. I will stop here. The request made to us on this work, it is a problem. And for MSF is present throughout this chain of events. MSF was present in Maghreb, they're present at sea, they're present in Italy and in various countries in Europe. Now, the question for me would be to strengthen the activity that MSF could do. They're already doing it, but they could reinforce that because it is a necessity. Who should do this otherwise? So we need to invest and work with the other NGOs at sea to improve this ability to recover the bodies, strengthen the debriefs given to the survivors, because we only focus on the analysis of the situation. We're trying to find who is guilty, and we don't take into account the dead and the missing. So we have to have a debriefing, and that's the work MSF is doing with the victims. And there is a medical follow-up, on the health of the people in Europe. And we're trying to listen because there are cases of traumas, and we have to sometimes get information later on dramatic events. And it shouldn't come out only at the time of disembarkment. Sorry for being so fast. I'll stop here. The only thing I wanted to show you in my last slide, this is the work we carried out with the Euromed. We tried to map all the players who are active to support the families. These people have tried to reinforce the capacity of civil society to support the families through exchanges, practices, and through information that is being discussed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Filippo, for having presented this topic and for having shown the problems counting the families. We'll go back on all these points with the other speakers.
Now, I'd like to give the floor to Silvia Di Meo, who is an anthropologist and a researcher and president of the association MEMMED, Memory Mediterranean. And she's going to share with us her work on this project and how they work with families and how they identify people who died. Now, Silvia, can you hear us and can we see you? Well, wonderful. Now, Silvia, I'm very sorry, but I have to be the timekeeper, and, well, don't hold it against me, but I may have to interrupt you. Now, hello, everyone. I'm very sorry to not to be with you on site. I'm a researcher, an anthropologist, and I've been working on people who disappear and who died when crossing the sea. And since 2019, and I've been working with Tunisian families looking for their loved ones. And since 2022, I've been working on this project in Central Mediterranean, and more particularly in Turkey and Tunisia, regions where bodies, people may have been buried in local cemeteries, in local graveyards. And we were able to see the consequences of the policies put in place to control migrations and the impact of outsourcing the border, meaning that the Mediterranean Sea has become a graveyard. Now, all these impacts have been looked into by several people on the various routes, including the Mediterranean. And because we're based in the southern part of Italy, we looked at cases of violence that affect either directly or indirectly the families and the migrants who try to reach Europe. Despite the international laws, such as the Geneva Convention, explaining what is a decent, proper way to deal with bodies, how these bodies should be buried, how families should be warned. Well, unfortunately, these rules are not really enforced, and there's a lack of cooperation between the states and also within each state between the various services involved. So up to now, there's been no system whatsoever to take action or to do something about all this that would be efficient. The Italian authorities do not seem to be prepared to cope with the magnitude of the tragedy. And Mehmed has been working in order to help the families who've lost loved ones. So we try to help these families to get in touch directly with Italian authorities. We could see that these families had no right to know. Families are not told about the fate of their loved ones who disappeared, who died, and they are left without any news for a very long time and for years on end. And this led to, and of course, this is contrary to the Geneva Convention, which stipulates that states have a duty to facilitate the search for people who disappeared and have a duty to support the services that are in charge of looking into these disappearances. We could see how difficult it is for families to get contacted directly by the Italian authorities. The Italian authorities are not too keen on responding to these requests. And there's also a lack of people to whom you can turn, like the consulates or the forensic police or investigators that can help to recover the bodies. All these services do not work together. There's also the problem of the psychosocial suffering for families all this has a psychological impact. They can't grieve and they can't overcome their grief because they can't be certain that their loved ones are dead. They don't know. And the authorities do not give access to justice nor to truth. And this, of course, impacts the right to care and the right to integrity for these families. So on this, in this framework, we decided to develop a legal support, legal assistance with 2 lawyers, also psychosocial counseling with psychologists and researchers. And on the legal side, we implemented some legal instruments in order to be able to work directly with the jurisdictions in charge in order to identify the bodies, to repatriate the bodies, also to locate the bodies, not only in bodies that are that come ashore, but also people who are deprived of freedom, who are held in centers where there can be a first identification. And also, we want to help in repatriation of bodies in accordance with families' wishes. Now, these are very dramatic and tragic circumstances. Whenever a boat capsizes and there are fatalities, it becomes more difficult for these families to grieve, and these families are faced with a very difficult situation, and it's full of anxiety. So we've tried to put something in place for self-help, and this we developed with a group of Tunisian mothers and sisters, of people who disappeared between 2011 and 2021. Lately, we can say that the lack of public acknowledgement contributed to a delegitimation of families' experiences that cover many years. And several organizations in civil society have become aware of this and have supported these families and have decided to bear witness to the various actions that were undertaken by these families, and in link with their claims, with their requests, these organizations have decided to support the fight for the right of these families to know and also the right of free movement. Finally, I'd like to refer to the latest large, important shipwreck on the 26th of February 2023 with 150 people on board, majority of them from Afghanistan. They left Turkey, and this was widely publicized. The shipwreck took place off the shore of Calabria, and there were tens of people who disappeared. And obviously, it's not the last one, but it's quite iconic, and it's quite emblematic because this shipwreck could have been avoided. It was only some tens of meters away from the coastline. But it is made possible because the Italian authorities didn't rescue those who were overboard, and despite being alerted to the fact that there had been a wreck. And like other shipwrecks in Lampedusa in 2015, 2016, the lack of a protocol for cooperation between the various institutions, national and international organizations, prevented the work of identification of victims. And I was on site after the shipwreck, and the bodies, unfortunately, were already showing signs of severe decomposition when the post-mortem, when the forensic identification started. And not only did the body show signs of decomposition, but the rights of these migrants' families were also completely ruined. So yes, indeed, these people were dead, but the lack of speedy identification is also something that corresponds to the fact that there is this outsourcing of borders. Finally, with regard to Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF was present in Coutron at the time of the shipwreck. And I must say that MSF's support to the shipwreck survivors was absolutely essential. Obviously, those who survived and victims' families arriving from different European countries were not truly taken into consideration by the Italian state. So the psychological counseling provided by MSF was very important for bodies identification and repatriation. MSF's work in Coutron was indeed exemplary and should be further extended to cope with other consequences when there is a shipwreck and when families are faced with this situation. Thank you, Silvia. Now, thank you very much for describing how you work and how other organizations work, also with MSF, and also thank you for highlighting the lack of cooperation and the lack of action on behalf on the part of the state. And Filippo also highlighted the various civil society stakeholders, and this gives me the right cue with to Rachid's talk. Rachid is an artist and painter, an engraver, and he's going to tell you about the initiatives, individual initiatives, but these individual initiatives are also encompassed by a wider scale approach. Thank you very much. Yes, this is a real tragedy, a large-scale tragedy, though we are not truly aware of its scope because the states, the authorities tend to conceal it. So I'm an artist. I'm based in Paris. I was born in the desert in Algeria. Someone said that some people die in the desert, but these people are on trucks, and people are on top of suitcases and stuff and things. And should a tire be punctured, well, the lorry, the truck, is surrounded by 4x4 cars, And if a tire is punctured, well, they just run away, they just drive away on board their four-wheel drives, and they just leave people in the truck to die in the desert. Now, one day, my daughter Aisha, who leads Action contre la faim in London, and she gave me a call and she told me that bodies were just put on lawn fields, people who had died in the desert, and they were not buried properly, but they were just dumped. And so I couldn't believe her, but I went there and I talked to someone who is a member of the Red Crescent and also a pharmacist, someone who did a lot to support Syria at the time of the earthquake, and then also involved in the migrants, in help to migrants. And indeed, I could see this heap of human bodies, 1,700 bodies on this heap, dumped in the midst of a landfill close to the city. Didn't seem to bother anyone. I was absolutely taken aback. I was appalled, and I told the Red Crescent that I was ready to sell some of my works and build a cemetery, build a graveyard for these people, that it was not possible for Tunisia to go on doing this with the bodies. I was told that I couldn't buy land in Tunisia because I don't have the nationality. And my daughter, who is Tunisian, was ready to take my money and buy the land. And I wanted this land to be, I wanted it to be close to the heap of bodies, and because I really wanted to avoid these bodies to be eaten away by hyenas, by dogs, by animals. And I asked about someone who could build this, and I got a number. I got in touch with the architect, and so on this land, quite a large one, we bought it in 2018. The construction was over in 2022, and we thought it would be by far sufficient. Now, this place gave rise to insults, racism, reactions that I never thought I would be faced to in North African countries. It is really absolutely appalling. It was absolutely hideous the way people reacted. And some friends told me I was going to end up in trouble, that the authorities, I had to get the authorities' approval to build this graveyard, and so on and so forth. It took me 4 years to build this place. So as you can see, and I would like to explain the symbols. Here is a room for praying. It's open to all, Muslims or others. There's, it's not like in a European cemetery. It's you don't have the Muslim quarter or the Muslim square and so on and so forth. So I just wanted these bodies to be buried, all of them, and it's facing the east. I wanted these dead people each day to be caressed by the light of the sun. All the trees on each side of the alleys are bitter orange trees, bitter oranges are bitter, but you can also mazhar. It's the water, orange flower water, and it's also considered to be the water of luck. And pomegranate on the other side. A pomegranate is just like mankind. It's all these grains are so close together and you can't break it. You can't break it. Then the jasmine, which is the tree you find in paradise, and the fourth one is a tree that's that with a flower that is with an odor which is much stronger than jasmine, and then the bougainvillea with their red flowers, red like the blood. And here is a 130-year-old olive tree. It's aligned with the prayer room. It's a symbol of peace. On the other side, there are 5 olive trees for the 5 pillars of Islam, the fasting, prayer, donation, and then going to Mecca, and the 5th one. And then there are the 12 cities, also the 12 walls for the 12 apostles around Jesus. So it's really open to all religions, and all these plants are very thick ones, and so that they can be like globes of light, globes in the sky. Now here's this was a woman in a black dress. Unfortunately, she couldn't be identified, and for the DNA to be analyzed, you have to travel more than 100 kilometers to the next city. Unfortunately, when these people cross in the midst of the summer, they die. Well, their bodies decompose very quickly. Here's a baby, and this baby was with the mother who died. So now the bowels. It's really a mystical garden. It's not just a graveyard. Now the hole here with yellow for the sun and green for the earth, fecundity, and this tub here is used by birds. They can bathe in it, and they can then fly away to reach the sky and reach the angels. And on the other hand, of course, the water falls from the sky and falls on the earth. And so the birds can take the dead spirits and fly with it to the angels. And here's what I wanted to use for a symbol of the apostles. And here is the prayer with the 4 religions. Gavulsi, who is the great rabbi of Djerba, and the bishop, Audrey Azoulay, who is the Director General of UNESCO, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and so on and so forth. Of course, the Imam, and there are some Buddhists, of course, also some 85 people who crossed the sea. They left the Qatar and the construction sites for the World Cup. They suffered terribly. They had no passports. The passports are confiscated on arrival. They crossed, and so Pakistani and Bengali are buried here. And the only ambassador who came was the one from the Bangladesh. And the African countries didn't send any ambassadors. They told me, well, these people wanted to commit suicide. And it's so, you know that recently there was a French-speaking convention in Jardin. More than 70 heads of states and governments were brought together. Audrey Azoulay, UNESCO's Director General, asked the heads of state and governments to come and pray over these tombs. And the people were so up in arms against this, and with the expression of racism, that the heads of state and government couldn't reach the graveyard. Now we'll see there are 800 tombs here. And we think that maybe we would have to add a layer on top of this first one. And I wanted to say that this place is important. The guests are just shooting stars. And this Garden of Africa was designed and constructed and offered by the artist Rachid Koraïchi. And let this place be a paradise for those who are the damned of the earth. And so it's just for people to remember how it was done. And so it's important. Unfortunately, it was this graveyard was defamed by people of the city nearby, and so it's absolutely appalling. Thank you, Rachid.
I'm sorry, it was a bit short. Thank you very much. And for those of you who want to know more about it, a book has been published about this Garden of Africa, was published in London, and you can find it on websites. There are websites also explaining this project, which is full of humanity. Audrey Azoulay has had it classified in the World Heritage, and the Bahrain has also classified it recently. I said I didn't want to have the award, otherwise these bastards will kill me. So no awards. Thank you, Rachid. We'll move on to our last panelist, Jose-Pablo, who's going to tell us more about his work as a forensic anthropologist and all the challenges related to this and the migration road. And he's going to talk about Central and Latin America. Jose-Pablo, can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you perfectly. You have the floor. I'm sorry, time flies. No problem. I'll try and be as brief as possible. Some first discharge or responsibility. There's no migration crisis. All crises reach a peak, and then crises will mobilize interventions that can be efficient, but there is no quick fix, as we say, for what is currently happening. I'd like to talk about several things, but I will be talking about the dead people, not only that. Now, there is more than trying to understand why those people are dead, which is a kind of an obscene question. It's important to repeat our humanity in the way we deal with dead people. I'm not only talking about our deads, but the dead of other people that we don't know. It's not only about burials or bringing flowers, but it's also about respecting their identity, because humanity at the end of the day is about recognizing those people, as individuals, and not only as figures and numbers and statistics. It is important to mention this, and it's also about counting and accounting, as we say in English. It's very important to realize that we've come to a situation where the figures are being standardized and all these statistics are also useful for the causes that we defend, that is building up a dialogue with states that are developing these policies. But the problem starts very early in our analysis, because each organization, institution, community, group of people will count in different ways. Consequently, the narratives of the facts are very different. And I'll give you an example. I'll be more tangible and not so philosophical. ICRC will have its latest report published very soon, and they call it Counting the Dead. Now, to understand how many bodies of migrant people had been found in European destination countries, Spain, Italy, Greece, and Malta. The first report covers the period 2014 and 2019, and then there's 2021. Now, the International Migration Organization talks about so many people who are reported missing or dead, disappeared or dead, reported missing, we don't know. For this particular period, Europe, for 2014-2019, recovered only 13% of the bodies. And between 2020 and 2021, only 7% of the people who were reported as dead or missing. That's virtually nothing. So another way of telling the story is that these figures are showing us that the situation has improved because the percentages went down by 50%, 13% versus 7%. Wonderful, but statistics are concealing a reality, which is that the number of people who are crossing, who've disappeared, have bodies that were never found. That's the reality. And you see, this standardization of statistics can lead to misleading interpretation. And this opens up to another discussion. Filippo has talked about these figures of the first report and the differences between the countries when it comes to the identification of migrants. In some countries, there is more effort to identify those than in others. In Spain, it's more or less 50% of identification. It's slightly more in Greece because they have fewer cases, and they have people who come mainly from Turkey. And in Italy, it is not the case. Now, the most important question that keeps bothering me in the back of my mind, people from the developing countries are missing. And then you can talk about what is happening in the Americas. Did you know that in 2023, more than 500,000 people have crossed the border? They came mainly from Latin America, Haiti, and myself. I've came across with people from Congo, from Iran, from Ethiopia, from Eritrea, who arrived in Colombia and in Brazil, and who then started to walk up north. The problem, just like in the Mediterranean, we don't know how many people arrived there, what was their fate. And in this particular case, the likelihood of disappearing or dying on the road is very high, because you can die in any of those countries on the road, not because only of crime, but it can be a traffic accident or any other cause of this. But crime plays a very important role here. We will be discussing later about the fact that Mexico now counts more than 50,000 bodies unidentified, and an unknown percentage of these bodies are migrants. There are various reasons to that, but I would be ready to answer any questions you might have about it. But then the second question that rises when we go back to the Mediterranean area, but it's not only the only road. We didn't talk about the desert and other migration routes. What do we do with the bodies that are not there? That's the most important question. Can humanity accept the absence of body? We're waiting for somebody else to take care of it. And families are waiting. How many families behind the figures that I have given you? Between 2014 and 2019, 13% of bodies were found amongst those people who were reported as missing or dead, and 13% were found in the departure countries. What about the 64% of people who are missing? And if we consider the 2020-2021 figures, what about the 86% of those people? That's the question. And I think that the advocacy for people who are reported missing or dead, most of those people are dead, has an impact on thousands of families across the world. And therefore, we need to have other forensic knowledge to help the families, to use an English word in French. Those would help for several things. Create the capacity in the states to manage the bodies in an efficient manner, not necessarily in a sophisticated fashion, but in an efficient manner to collect data so as to identify those people, to get in touch with the families. And Filippo has mentioned a long list of things to be done with the families. And finally, I'd like to add that we tend to look at this problem in a retrospective fashion, but in reality, it's a prospective issue. It's happening as we are talking now. With a retrospecting focus, we have no solutions. That is, if we consider the gross figures, once again, one can say that between 2014 and 2021, and that's the data from the International Migration Organization, we're talking 26,000 people who've disappeared. That's 25,871. But that's an underestimate. That is 9 people who disappear every day. Where is humanity there? That's my question. Thank you very much, Jose-Pablo. We'll have some time now for a debate. I'd like to remind you that for those of you who are listening to us online, you can ask your question via the chat on Zoom. I'm sorry, there is little time for the discussion and the debate, but as you have understood, it's a very interesting topic. I'd like to thank all the speakers because they've respected the time they were allocated. Are there any questions here in Paris from the floor? Sarah has a question. Maybe somebody else will pick up here from this room. We've talked about the work done by MSF with Geo Barents ship for the search and rescue operations. But I think that the teams are probably also collecting bodies on the ship. I think that there are some... The head of mission is with us. There you are. Maybe you can tell us a bit about it. What do you do when you're faced with this, when you have to to deal with the bodies? What about the connections with the local authorities?
I'm the humanitarian affairs coordinator with the search and rescue mission, and in fact, it's a complicated process. We do have guidelines on board how we handle whenever we have deceased persons on board, which might be because people have drowned during a shipwreck, or because they could not be successfully resuscitated on board our vessel. So these are the cases that we're talking about. And I mean, we've heard how the system onshore, for several reasons, is often failing the people, the survivors, the relatives of the deceased. What we're trying to focus on the Geo Barents, on our rescue vessel, is on the identification of the deceased, which starts with the recovery of the bodies. For that reason, if possible, we try to recover the bodies. For example, if we have a big wooden boat, we have deceased on the lower deck of the boat, we try to recover them if possible, if it's safe for our teams. For example, we have chemical suits on the ship that would allow our staff to enter this part of the boat, which is often full of fuel, of a toxic liquid. So we would recover the bodies. That is kind of the first step, in order then later, with the help of other survivors, often relatives who have been traveling with those people who have who died, who are able to identify them. So we're taking them through the process of the identification. It's being done by our medical team, but also we often or usually have a psychologist on board who would try and help the survivors to go through that process, which on one side is actually for the identification of the body, so that we can issue a death certificate that we can then hand over to authorities once we reach land. But it's also, it turned out to be a helpful process for the survivors, for the relatives to go through that process, to be able to see their family, their friends again. We give space to survivors on board to whatever they wish in terms of have a little ceremony on board, for prayers, for music, if there is an interest. And also that all of that is linking back to the fact that we as MSF, at least in the search and rescue mission, we have little to no control over what happens once we reach land, once we can actually hand over the bodies to the authorities. So we try at least what on board of our vessel we can ensure in terms of identification, but also support for the survivors to do. We also try and support our own staff after these events, because you can imagine that it's also for everyone involved a quite heavy process, also the marine crew. So this is a bit what we're trying on the ship. But again, what was mentioned previously, the process on land is quite difficult, is often quite lengthy. We do also refer to the Red Cross in Italy on land. We share the list of the deceased, or at least the information that we can establish on the ship, with the Red Cross, with the authorities. But again, it's often a very, very lengthy process, which is also the reason why we try to really equip the survivors on board with also the information. So it has turned out also more effective that actually the people themselves inform families once they reach shore. Voila, this is a bit the process in the main headlines, but it's tricky, and we're very, very limited in what we can do here.
Thank you. Any other questions? Don't forget to speak in the microphone that's for the interpretation. Jean-Loup Chifflet, I'd like to ask a very indiscreet question to Rachid. Are you a millionaire because you've financed this cemetery? Where does the money come from? I have two art galleries, one in New York and one in London. This helps to track back the source of money. You know, many people say that I've spent and spilled all the money of NGOs. It was very important for me for this. Americans do control each and every dollar that is spent on this. Same for the pounds. Every currency is reaching the Central Bank of Tunisia, and then it is transferred to the offshore bank of Baraka, and then it goes directly to the Red Crescent. I'm an artist. I have published many books, and I have also designed many cemeteries that I do finance, and I will tell you why. I'd rather not have things that would please me. Like, I don't even have a bicycle. I have no car. I don't gamble. I don't drink. I don't smoke. And I'm a vegetarian, so you know, my needs are quite limited. The first cemetery that I designed, to answer you, was in Château d'Amboise, the François I's, close to the tomb of Leonardo da Vinci, for 25 Algerian of the Mirabel-Caber family, because they had been buried in a mass grave. I designed the project in 2005, and there are so many communities there, people from Muslim origin, and also Sufist communities come and pray there. The second cemetery that I've designed was November 1st last year, and I will tell you why. It's a 3.8 meters statue in La Courneuve, where many migrants used to live in the 50s, 60s, 70s, up to the independence of Algeria, in slums where there was no sewage. It's in the Great Park of La Courneuve. It's a tribute to 200 French people and their friends from CGT, the French Union, who went to Paris to demonstrate and ask why they were not allowed to demonstrate. And they were killed under the decision of Mr. Papon, who was formerly a prefect in Paris. And now I have designed another cemetery in Sainte Marguerite, and I've been fighting for 25 years with the National Front, you know, the Éric Zemmour, Le Pen families, etc. And currently the great mayor of this town has allowed me to design this cemetery for more than 500 Algerians who were kidnapped in Algeria in 1884 and who've died. And those people were the fathers and forefathers of several generations of Algerians who are now French, of course. So that's why I do design these cemeteries, and that's my history with cemeteries. Thank you, Rachid. More questions? There is always a need for a microphone for interpretation purposes. I met Rachid recently in a wonderful place called Democracy and Spirituality. And I'm an artist myself, and I have set up an organization called Sereine Couleur in La Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. And I've heard that you have also designed wonderful pieces of art that I would like to discover. So thank you very much, Rachid, for what you've done. Thank you. So it's worth being sick then. You have to go to the hospital to see his work. Questions online? I'll be reading the questions, says Michael. A question to Filippo, if Filippo is still with us online, hopefully. Can we have access to the map of the list regarding this civil society organization? Can we display the map? Is this map available somewhere? The document that Filippo was showing us? Filippo, can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you. It's a work document, has not been published yet, but it will be partly published and posted as from February 6th, when all the civil society organization will mobilize to claim for the rights for the dignity of those people who died at sea. So as from February 6th, this will be available. Not with this outline. The Euromed network is designing a new map. So on the website, you will have access to this map as of February 6th. So please wait till February 6th to have access to this document. Do you have more questions? My name is Henri Lefebvre from GUPA, the association branch of MSF France. What about the other stakeholders involved in identifying body? Could you please tell us about the caravans that existed in Latin America, mothers and sisters caravans that were trying to track back their relatives on the roads of Latin America? I think it also existed in Tunisia. Jose-Pablo, maybe you know about that? The problem with identification of human remains is based on comparisons. So if we do not have any contextual information, like a body is found and decomposed and naked on a beach, it's very unlikely that this body will be identified, because there is a need for an innovative technique to find, to identify. But DNA, okay, can be sampled, but it has to be compared with the DNA of somebody. In Latin America, the mothers' caravans, many marches organized by mothers, many groups of families are mobilized, but that does not necessarily contribute to the identification of bodies, because the problem is still the same. You don't have the context. So as soon as you've lost track of someone on the road, and that's something that we have not discussed because we didn't have the time, but it's also about allowing migrants to be connected and letting their relatives know where they are, so that their families can have a trace of where they might be. And that's not really clear. I think that ICRC has had a few projects which were not implemented, and which could, like giving some objects to a migrant, like a bracelet, for instance, or anything. And you will tell me what's your name and who to call if you're lost. Same as you're going for a long flight, you have to give the contact, a phone number of a contact person if in case the flight crashes. So the main problem for identification in general is that we need to understand that identification of bodies found in a given state is the legal responsibility of the state. You can provide aid, support, technical assistance to the state, but it is the responsibility of the state. There cannot be any proxy or substitute. It's not the work of families to do that. It doesn't work that way. So you need to work on this. Therefore, there is a need to have a more articulate advocacy with those who are involved in these situations. It's not only MSF or ICRC only who will be able to convince the authorities to perform their job better, but it's a forensic task. And then you have to see whether the identification is possible or not.
I would like to add something. Yes, Silvia, please go ahead. I wanted to talk about this issue. I just wanted to say something about the committees at sea and in the Tunisian desert. Their testimonies are very important in Tunisia and in Italy. Since a long time, there are Tunisian family committees, mothers and sisters who are fighting for truth and justice. But since 2022, a small group of mothers and sisters met and have started claiming things in Tunisia, in the whole of Tunisia. And they've taken part in the Euromed events that Filippo mentioned and the marches in Europe and in Brussels. And they went to Sicily in 2022. A delegation of Tunisian mothers and sisters came to Italy for a few days, and they visited Lampedusa, and they talked with the authorities, and they denounced the situation, the disappearing of the dead. And it was a very important opportunity. It did not help identify the bodies, but it was very important because to note the responsibility of the Italian and Tunisian states to show their discrepancies, their lack of work to identify those people who had gone missing. And in this way, we can keep a memory of what's happening in the Mediterranean. So this fight of these families, I think that they have to be underlined, and that is the main strategy to counter the racist discourses and the European discourses. So their fight was very important against the European indifference, and it had a great value. We created collaboration between the Tunisian mothers and sisters and with migrant women, refugees who are at the Libyan and Tunisian borders, especially in the city of Medellin. And they organized several encounters to discuss the people disappearing at sea. And they embroidered a dress with all the words recalling the suffering, the violence, and the situation at the borders and the lives at sea. So it isn't always useful in the identification approach and to search for those who have disappeared, but it's a political action, like the marches in Brussels and other European cities, where the discourse, the memory, the narratives of the mothers, especially the mothers and sisters of those who have died, these are coming in contrast with the discourses of the European politicians and the regime which is exercised at the frontiers, at the borders. Thank you, Silvia. As for this point, maybe Fabrice, I think you have a question? Yes, I have a question which might be a bit candid. Do we have an idea on the circumstances under which the dead, the people are dying and disappearing in the Mediterranean? And related to the rescue operations, when is it happening? I mean, forensics, there's a moral, ethical issue vis-a-vis the deceased people. But what does it tell us on the rescue operations carried out at sea and the ability to improve them to limit the number of people dying? I'll give the floor to one of the speakers. Filippo, would you like to rebound on this question? I would just like to take a step back on what we were saying regarding the rescue operations at sea and the ability to identify and reduce the number of dead. The ideal would be to avoid people for traveling in such dangerous conditions, to review the European mobility policies, I think. That would be a good track. And from a practical point of view, to be at sea, having more people at sea, to be able to intervene. The fact that, as Pablo was saying earlier on, between 2014 and 2018, there were more bodies recovered and disembarked in Italy because there were more players intervening and a lot more people were saved. The number of boats that had disappeared and the bodies that had disappeared in 2023 that I mentioned earlier on, well, that is because the capacity, the will to intervene, to save people, that has diminished. And that has diminished also because of technical shortcomings and technical will. When somebody from the Italian government says that the activity of the Italian government is to deter and not rescue at sea, this deterrence, this is an MP from the Giorgia Meloni's party. The idea is not to go and save people to limit the number of dead. Now, from the technical point of view, I just wanted to mention something. There's something we notice when we work on the disembarkment and when we work with the players at sea, especially people involved in the MSF operations between 2014 and 2018. The information that the staff on board could collect through survivors on the people missing or deceased, and that was logged into and passed on to the Italian authorities, that was not taken into account. So we need to improve the capacity of the authorities to take into account all this work. It's important, and that is not taken into account. So often when the boat unloads bodies, the information collected by the personnel on board is not taken into account by the staff. This is a technical issue, and we could imagine working on that. Thank you. We are running over time. I do not know if there's a last question. I have one for Jose-Pablo, just to recall that we've discussed with Jose-Pablo a few years back on the question of identifying the bodies in our operations in Libya when Jose-Pablo was working in Paris on the Mediterranean space. And I'd like to go back to this episode, not recall it in details, but ask you, if we had to put this question back to MSF, what can we do within that framework, forgetting the rescue operations at sea, looking at what we're doing on land with the people in exile, the migrants that we're trying to help in Libya. That was the whole issue of our discussions at the time. So what's our purpose here in this discussion? Well, not much. I remember this conversation, and there's something I need to add that is related to the previous question and related to what you've just said. I think that the data, what is important, and we discussed this at the time, I'm absolutely convinced that data is very important. How many people are departing? We do not know from where they're departing. We know more or less how many boats can depart every night with how many people, and the rest is very vague information, general information. One example, a small successful story. This is the project. It's a Spanish project. It's something we began in the Canary Islands to try to rebuild the events of the people who could not go on the boats. with a very clear methodology based on the data. There's a lot of mathematics behind all this, but it isn't something that is undoable. So what can we do? We have to collect data, but not only collect data in order to do nothing, but to exploit them. And who's going to do that? And MSF could be part of this dimension. Remember, you at the time, I suppose that now also you have access to places where nobody else has access. And these people could embark to Europe. And this information is very important. And we could never use this information. And we haven't worked in Italy. We don't have a basis in Tunisia and Libya or a basis in Italy to find out what the flows look like. But I think that that is the key of the story. There's no magical solution, but this is very important. And the other thing, which is very important, you have a boat. And with the Spanish, we've tried to do this, something that I do not know if it is still done, if somebody is still interested in doing this. That is to establish a modeling on the survival of the people. It's quite cruel what I'm saying, but it's important. That is, we've heard that in the Atlantic, we did not know what was the cutting point to say that a boat departing, I do not know how many days ago, has not arrived. The probability that the people might have died is quite high. And that is very important. But not only to know if the people have died or not, if we're searching for them or not, not just for that. It's also to see, and this is clearer, that a person leaving point A and who's trying to reach point B, where could that person be? And this modeling is possible. I sat with some experts to look at the white zones, a person leaving from, I do not know what point, in Algeria, going to Spain. And on that day, the weather wasn't good. The boat had a small motor that was useless. The motor stopped working in the middle of the sea. Where could that person have stopped? And that person should be on the road of large vessels, maybe, and that is the added value. So our discussions are continuing, and they're really still quite topical. Thank you. We have to continue. We have to continue. And I see not the role of MSF, but the UN, civil society, various players, advocacy to talk about all this, mobilize so that there might be coordination, so that there might be a coordinated response, a greater visibility on these dead and missing people. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the panelists for having spent your time here, for having shared your knowledge on this issue. I'd like to once again thank the interpreters, the technicians, and the crash for having organized this conference with CEL2. It's important to talk about the dead, the research work, identification work. This has raised quite a number of questions, and there will be more questions, and this discussion should remain active because, as Michael said, this discussion exists within MSF since a number of years. We've raised this in our operations, and it should continue in our teams. We talked about the impacts on our families. We should not minimize this migration issue. And it was important to see the determination of all the players who are mobilizing themselves to keep identifying the bodies, to speak with the families. So thank you once again for having taken part in this conference. And yes, sorry for forgetting, for those who are here present. There'll be a cocktail, a drink down in the atrium so that you can pursue the discussions for those who wish to stay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.